Broadcasting live. It's America's longest running talk show on computers. It's Computer America, bringing you the biggest names in technology with guest interviews, new products, and your emails. Listen live at computeramerica.com on any device around the world. Email the show at live@computeramerica.com or find us on social media. Be sure to check out our website for contests, giveaways, show notes, live video stream, podcasts, and more. You're listening to Computer America.
Hello and welcome into the Computer America Show. We are the nation's longest running, nationally syndicated radio talk show on computers and technology. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Ben Crossman. Everyone, I hope you're having a great day because, hey, we have a great show planned for you where we'll be talking to actually two different companies, although it's one topic and it's going to be a very interesting one for anyone out there who's maybe a bit of a daredevil or someone who just enjoys something a little bit different and extreme. This is going to be a very interesting show because don't get me wrong, we love it when we talk about routers and webcams and things like that, but this is different. This is going to be a lot of fun. So joining us here in just a moment will be our guest. But before we do, I need to mention computeramerica.com. That will have the show notes, which will have a link to both, to both websites that our guests are from, and any videos that we show, any demonstrations, anything like that, we'll include it in the show notes. So very simple. After the show, if you want to check it out, very simple. Also, be sure to check out the live video stream, and on top of that, you can find any articles, reviews, anything that we do here on the show. But I don't want to keep it too long because I just want to get to our conversation today. So welcome into the program. Again, everyone, I hope you're having a great day and you're ready for our guests. So joining us today, we actually have two companies and we're going to introduce them both right away. And our first guest is Dr. Tulinda Larson. She is the Executive Director at Deseret UAS, and you can find them at deseretuas.org. Again, we'll have it in the show notes. And then our second guest is Mr. John Manning. He is the co-founder of ElectraFly and ElectraFly.com. Include that in the show notes. And let's see. So real quick, if you guys would just unmute yourself and we'll be good to go.
Hey, thank you, Ben. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us. And John? Oh, wait, John, you're still muted. Just real quick.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Did you say to introduce ourselves? Is that...
Yes, yeah, please.
Yes, so I'm John Manning. I'm one of the co-founders of ElectraFly, and we are a company that has two primary missions: to increase payload and range for multi-rotor aircraft. And we've done that by building a personal flying machine. It's a hybrid electric personal flying machine, and it's something you might expect out of the movie Star Wars, but we live in the future, and it's time that these things start happening for real.
Very, very well said. And then, of course, we're going to turn over to Dr. Tulinda, and if you could explain, kind of where Deseret UAS kind of comes in with this, because the flying machine, we're going to talk about that. That's great. But if I'm not mistaken, you kind of give them a play field.
Absolutely. So Deseret UAS is a new nonprofit, just started in Utah in October of last year. And we're funded by the state of Utah with the mission to promote unmanned aerial systems and urban air mobility in Utah. And we are doing that through having test sites for vehicles just like the ElectraFly. We also are accomplishing our mission by fostering applied research. And we are very excited to be on the show today because what we're here to talk about is the Jetsons. If you guys remember back in the 60s, although most of us don't, but the TV show with the flying cars, the Jetsons. So this technology of urban air mobility goes everything from what John is talking about as a single person on a personal vehicle all the way up to some of the aircraft we'll be testing will carry 6 or 8 people. So it's a whole new technology that's being ushered in, and Deseret UAS is fostering this kind of technology in Utah with the hopes that the companies come in and settle and set up their manufacturing and their business in our good state of Utah.
Very, very interesting. So I'm going to, kind of direct this one to John. Obviously, you started this company, and definitely co-founder. So you started this company, and having a place like Utah to call home, to have a place like this to test your equipment, how important is it to have very clear guidelines and very clear places that you can fly and test and not have to worry about, the military or someone calling you up and going, "Hey, you flew too close to us. Shame on you." How important is it to have places like Utah?
Sure. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Basically, the way I see the world that we've lived in up until this last year, it's almost like the wild, wild west in terms of the UAS system, unmanned aerial systems. 90% of the activity out there was illegal, and regulation, frankly, just stifled innovation. You couldn't fly. Well, there's still a lot of regulations that make this illegal, and virtually any aircraft that's unmanned and over 55 pounds runs into massive regulatory issues. And we never really had a relief from those regulations. That's what Deseret UAS provides, is that it provides like this, little safe harbor where legitimate companies who want to experiment with legitimate products can go and do that safely and have some shelter from existing regulation and still provide the utmost in safety to surrounding areas and non-participating people.
So,
John said, can I just amplify what John is saying? Unmanned aerial vehicles break into two groups. The under 55-pound aircraft, those are operated both as hobbyists and commercial operators. There's about 1.2 million unmanned drones in the United States registered with the FAA. Of that, only 200,000 are registered as commercial. And you compare that to manned aircraft, there's 250,000 manned aircraft in 100 years of flight. And this 1.2 million is just in like 2.5 years. So it's an amazing industry. So these smaller aircraft have some relief. The FAA set up back in 2016 the parameters for which unmanned aerial systems less than 55 pounds can operate, can test, can do their missions. And what John is pointing out is that as we move into these larger vehicles that are carrying people and packages, that's become no man's land. There is not a good set of regulations yet by the FAA. So what Deseret UAS has done is we've partnered with the Utah State University's program called Aggie Air. Aggie Air has been flying drones since 2007, and they have the proper FAA authority to do research. So we're going to take John's aircraft and tuck it under the operating authority of USU and Aggie Air and fly it as research as much as we need to under the research, what they call COA, Certificate of Authority. But then we're going to help John's company get their own authority to operate and then help them progress toward actual certification within the FAA structure. We've identified more than 250 aircraft like John's aircraft that are out there in development and will need some place to safely test and find out if that aircraft just flies, first of all, and then to progress on to getting it certificated by the FAA.
So, and one of my immediate reactions to this is obviously the Super Bowl just happened. That was a big sporting event and, large gatherings of people. And more so this year because there were also a couple incidents of drones flying near airports, and the airports had to shut down. They had to track down the drone, see who was stupidly flying these things near planes. And I think that things in the air scare either, and I'm sure that you can correct me, doctor, but scare either regulators or law enforcement or a lot of these other agencies because it's really an unknown. Protecting airspace just hasn't really been something that you had to worry about. Not many people had access to private helicopters or things like that. But over the past 2, 3, 4 years, drones have become a real issue. Now you're talking about putting, like you said, up to 8 people or something like ElectraFly into the consumer's hands.
No, not into the consumer's hand. They will be operated and regulated just like any other aircraft. And what we're looking at in urban air mobility is a concept that Utah is being in the forefront of creating highways in the sky, where the state already has right-of-way over highways and all the roads. Mm-hmm. So we're going to create above the roads where there already is authority or operating right-of-way, highways in the sky where these aircraft will fly and take advantage of one of the biggest untapped natural resources in our country, which is our airspace. So the vision is that these larger vehicles will be flying over streets and over highways, not just randomly. And going back to the Super Bowl, technologies, counter UAS technologies are being developed. And here in Utah, we have Fordham Technologies that has an incredible device. It's called the Drone Hunter. You can set up around the Super Bowl a protected area where if a rogue drone comes into that protected area, their drone hunter will hunt it down, spit out a Spider-Man kind of a net, grab it, and bring it in. There's a lot more of that technology being developed. The second issue, again, along the lines of what you're talking about with the Super Bowl, is that the FAA now has the authority granted by Congress in the last reauthorization of the FAA to require remote identification of drones. The hobbyists have been fighting it because they treat it like a model aircraft, but drones are a lot different than a model aircraft. They can go anywhere, not just on a flight pattern around a little airport. So this remote ID will allow law enforcement to be able to know who is operating that aircraft. Right now, you don't know. The aircraft is out there, and you can't find the operator unless you get the aircraft. You can't shoot the aircraft down because it's a felony in the United States to shoot down aircraft, and it's been determined that drones are indeed aircraft. So this remote ID will be like transmitting, I don't know if you operate a boat, your boat would transmits its ID on the water. That will be the same thing with transmitting the ID of the drone or the urban air mobility vehicle, where you'll know exactly who the owner is, where it's going, where it came from, and all of its other specifications.
I gotcha. And John, I wanted to get you in here. So on the video portion, we're going to go ahead and kind of show the YouTube video that you have up on your site. So there's a lot to kind of digest there from the policy standard, from the policy viewpoint. As a company who's trying to bring something to market, I mean, a lot of rules, but what are you most excited about when you have something, like you're designing, something like a motorcycle that can fly? What are you excited about? Even with all the hurdles that you have to overcome, what has you so excited about this space?
What am I excited about? I'm excited that we live in the future. I'm excited that it's possible, that the technology's out there, and that for once we don't have to just dream about it, but we can actually do this stuff. And that to me is empowering and extremely exciting.
Very, very cool. And of course, we're also going to check out your website here. So all this being combined into, kind of a personal aircraft device. And I guess my question when I look at, some of these things, because, you mentioned about travel, and I think has very clear implications about getting people from one place to another. But if I'm not mistaken, yours kind of has like a sport kind of thing to it, like maybe a thrill seeker, or something a little bit more on the personal level. Is that where you see ElectraFly, or are you kind of designing the next aircraft to kind of do both?
Yeah, so I think the question is really about the use, and I think that to begin with, the use does definitely lend itself to this high adrenaline junkie type setup where there are a few of the other aircraft that are in this environment that are setting up races and competitions, and I think that that's a great place to start. Part of the reason is because of the regulation environment that we deal with. I think another use that we can see is military, and and again, in the military world, their ability to manipulate the regulation to allow certain uses that outside of the military we wouldn't be able to do. But the future use of ElectraFly is certainly what Dr. Larson referred to as urban air mobility. The future of the Jetsons, where we've always kind of imagined people in a city environment, an urban environment, going from one rooftop to another and taking themselves there. That's what I think we all have in mind. And ElectraFly is like the minimum feature set to accomplish that mission. You know, there are a lot of people out there, as Dr. Larson mentioned, that are trying to develop technologies that fit in this urban environment. ElectraFly is not 6 or 8 people. It's just one person. It's personal transportation. But the great thing about it is it's very easy to operate. You don't need to be a pilot. It's very intuitive, and again, it uses futuristic technology to make this kind of thing possible for the average person.
I really do hope that you are right, because you know, you don't have to be a pilot, but you do if you want to land. Like I hope it's not something like that. There's a lot of sensors, I'm sure, that can go into this, because you know, even in today's cars, you know, you have features like auto parking and parallel parking and things like that. That's certainly possible. I've seen bikes that or motorcycles, I should say, that can actually correct themselves and keep themselves from tipping over. I'm sure that a lot of the technology is very applicable to what you're doing, but this seems like a very challenging space. And I guess to that point, having people, kind of do this, and maybe this is a question for Dr. Larson, but how complicated is, kind of the review process to let, not just people who tie balloons to lawn chairs and say, hey, we're going to need some airspace, but to actually vet qualified companies to, kind of explore what it is you're doing in Utah?
Well, what's happening is the FAA has teamed up with NASA and some of the states, like our state, and they are developing what's known as UTM, or UAS traffic management, which is a whole traffic management system to make sure that the aircraft, the unmanned and manned aircraft, operate in, as I said, the highways in the sky. You hit the nail on the head. The reason we're here today is automation. The whole technology revolution that's going on around automation, everything from your toaster being able to be programmed to the ability of the Tesla cars, that is all the same types of automation that you can bring up in creating a vehicle like John's, but also the vehicle that can carry more people. I encourage you to go to Uber Elevate. Uber Elevate is a very creative program that Uber, are the car driving service, they call it Uber Air. And the product there, you've got it. It's the future where you will call up on your phone, your Uber Air, and you'll take off from a rooftop and head to the airport, to downtown, to the hospital, wherever you need to go. Now, Uber is saying that they are going to have Uber Air operating in Los Angeles and Dallas by 2023. This is not a very far distant future. We are looking at having these, they will be piloted, but taking advantage of all the automation that is now available, detect and avoid, etc., that you are able to fly an aircraft with an operator instead of a pilot. So those are the technologies, and also it's the technology that's related to using electric engines that's allowing this industry to finally become a reality. Whereas, we talked about in the 60s, and we've talked for years about idea of flying cars. So the idea of having the multiple rotors, of having electric engines, and having the autonomy on board, you're able to make this much safer than anything we've ever had before, and certainly safer than driving your car yourself anywhere. So that's what's driving it, is automation, the development of the electric technology for vertical takeoff and landing, and the overall research that's gone into allowing these vehicles to, isn't that pretty impressive? You can just order it up. And she's headed home, and she's got a little terminal that she'll, like the bus terminal or the train station in her hometown, that she's going to land in this video that we're watching.
Yeah, no, and for everyone out there, just simply listen to the radio. We're going to include this link in the show notes. But yeah, just like a bus station or something like that, there would be, I guess, designated places to pick up, drop off for kind of personal air. And like you said, because this would be done through through these personal aircraft that aren't too expensive, you don't need a pilot to fly them, battery powered, things like that, it would be much more cost effective to do something like this. And this is where I'm going to throw it back to John. And John, kind of with what you're doing, what would you say are some of the technological hurdles? Because Dr. Larson just mentioned 2023 as a possible time when this could be operating, but hey, that's 4 or 5 years down the road. What are some of the improvements in technology that need to happen to make this really commercially viable?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. I think the short answer is batteries. To be a fully electric aircraft, to create fully electric aircraft that can carry a meaningful payload and fly a meaningful distance, we really need an improvement in battery technology. And currently, batteries are about 1/20th of the energy density of fuel. And so that's part of the reason that the ElectraFly is a hybrid electric system, where we still have a turbine engine, which you're seeing in the video there. And once we can improve battery technology where we can be all electric, flying machines will be everywhere, and they will be far more reliable and far simpler to operate. Dr. Larson was referring to a number of advantages of these aircraft over what we see typically, but they are way easier to operate and
safer, John.
And safer
than helicopters or anything that we have operating today.
Absolutely. But the short answer to the tech hurdles is batteries. We're very good at manipulating electricity. We're very good at using it just how we want to, but we're terrible at storing it. If we can crack that nut, the Jetsons will be here tomorrow in all varieties.
This is a computer show, so software is also a big part of the challenges. And one of the challenge is weather. Right now, we're working with the University of Utah in developing some algorithms for better forecasting of weather at low altitudes and in urban environments. The classic urban winds are so much different than the winds that are anywhere else. There's a lot of research on winds aloft for the manned aircraft, but there's not a lot of research at the lower altitudes. And another software, and I guess there is the sensing technology with the software to drive, detect, and avoid. So it's one thing, like I'm a drone pilot and I can fly my drone, it won't hit stuff, it knows how to collision avoid, but the next step is to detect another vehicle or some other object coming at the aircraft and then having it make the decision to avoid. It's the same issue that you have with the autonomous cars. They have to detect things coming at it and then the software decisions to avoid.
And we are going to completely avoid the topic of, the train track and one person, 10 people tied to the train track, and the philosophical, moral, ethical dilemma that happens there. Because I say that because I know that a lot of people out there might be thinking, well, what happens if do we avoid that aircraft but cause harm to ourselves and do that kind of thing? Like, to me, it's always just been, why can't we just follow the rules of the road? There are very clear indicators about what you should do if an emergency happens. Why can't we just follow those rules? So there's a lot there, and we can go into everything from artificial intelligence. To give a shout out to one of our other shows that we should be playing here shortly, we are going to have IBM here on the show talking about their quantum computers. And you were talking about weather modeling, quantum computers. That is really one of the key places quantum computers are going. So
you're absolutely right. That's what we need to move this whole industry forward, is that level of computing power.
Yeah, and hey, all you had to do was break physics as we know it. It's there's a lot to this, and on top of that, I guess for Dr. Larson, we're going to ask you, and then maybe John, if you want to put some input, but putting this, like you said, I mentioned consumer, and this is not going to be for people, or at least not right away. This is not going to be for people to have one of these in their driveway and take it to the grocery store, but rather these are going to be kind of like public transit or private transit, but in a public way. The business model. Do you really see this as something that everyday people will be using? Is this for business people? I mean, how do you see this fitting in with the landscape?
I believe it's first, holding John's vehicle aside, because his vehicle certainly can be personal use, military use, and some emergency response.
Right.
I think the first truly autonomous aircraft we're going to see is that ambulance, the autonomous ambulance that can go to a crash, go to some accident, and in that golden hour that you have to get the person to the hospital to save their life, having a unmanned autonomous vehicle come in, load the victim onto this vehicle that then can take off very swiftly over traffic, out of any of the congestion, and land at the hospital in minutes, will be saving lives. And I believe that's the first applications we're going to see. Then the second kind of applications will be, because of the advocacy that I'm seeing on airports in cities, is the transportation between the airport and downtown. Over the years, we've had a number of examples of helicopters trying to fill that need, that demand from the airport to get to the downtown. And helicopters have a lot of issues. One of them is you have to have, I think it's like 16 degrees of manipulation, and humans can only do 2 or 3. Well, once you've got that automation and you've got multiple rotors, you've got the safety, I think that's going to be the second big wave of implementation of these larger unmanned aerial vehicles into the marketplace.
You wanted me to follow up on that?
Sure, please.
I think there's a couple of things that, a couple of statistics that Dr. Larson knows that I am not remembering off the top of my head right now that I think are important. But in terms of the business model and how you make money, I think that definitely when you see early adopters, they're definitely going to be more government related. As Dr. Larson mentioned, the air ambulance type system. The way I see this industry is a lot like I imagine the automobile industry in 1814. The early adopters were not soccer moms who were looking for an easy way to take their kids back and forth. Frankly, the early adopters of the automobile were wealthy folks, and I think that for personal use, I think that the early adopters in the urban air mobility environment will also be wealthy individuals. But as we saw with the automobile industry, they are now mainstream. Automobiles, everybody has them. In some cases, people have 2 and or 3. And I think that the time is not far off where you'll see that same kind of production level, dropping the prices dramatically and making it so that everybody can have one of these if that's the way they choose to do it. But I also think that the future holds that we'll see a lot more shared ownership rather than personal ownership, where you order a ride from one rooftop to the next, but then that aircraft is repurposed to take somebody else on a second ride, where it's not just yours and it's not parked in a parking lot all day. The part that I wanted to ask Dr. Larson about is that there are statistics that I'm pretty sure Dr. Larson knows that talks about how much money was spent behind closed doors on urban air mobility systems in 2018. And there are also projected statistics on what this market is worth going forward. So from a business model, I think these numbers, when she gives them to you, are fantastic. And I think that there's a ton of opportunity for big or small businesses to make money in this arena.
Thank you, John. I don't really have the numbers off the top of my head, but they all come from when NASA called the industry together to announce the UAM Grand Challenge. NASA has some research studies done by very large consulting firms. Booz Allen and McKinsey did 2 companion studies, and they were showing that as an industry, it would break even about 2030, which sounds far, but it's really not that far away. It's only 11 years away that they look at the industry being able to come to a break even, and looking at the various use cases for developing markets for these vehicles. It's happening. You just think how quickly 2007 is when the iPhone was introduced, and here we are 12 years later. It's a ubiquitous tool that we all are used to using. And it also is that technology that was developed for the mobile phones that is helping with the guidance, the GPS, and the other inertial senses of these vehicles. So this technology is evolving in a much more rapid pace than the phones, the iPhones, or the autonomous vehicles.
Right. And we have seen that where technology certainly has a snowball effect. Everything seems to build on one another. We have, just a couple days ago, we had a company on that made the smallest live tracking GPS chip sensor. And by the way, all these guests have been from CES, and CES is just a great showcase. And I believe that, and I believe that ElectraFly was out there. And I mean, CES just showed off that everything that you're talking about, where it may be 10 years down the road, is already being done. It's just a matter of now just getting it out there and getting it all working together. So I think you're right, 2030.
Get the regulators to recognize and to start creating the regulatory framework to start putting. You were asking before the show, how do we work together? Mm-hmm. Well, at CES, we shared a joint booth. ElectraFly will be one of the first companies to come test on our test sites out in Utah. They also are a Utah-based company. But CES, you're right, it was very eye-opening to see the rapid pace of technology and how it's affecting all levels of our lives. And you also made a second good point, how there's a lot of cross-fertilization in the different development and the different paths that things, like I said, detect and avoid, the batteries, they all are being used in multiple technology functions that all come together, and which is pushing this industry forward at a very rapid pace.
Yeah. Ben, if you don't mind,
Sure.
I'll just add one other comment to the technology behind these multi-rotors. When I look at the industry, to me, it's amazing that we ever got a helicopter to fly. I come from an aviation background, and the axiom that people use to describe a helicopter is that it's a million parts flying in formation, and if one of those parts decides to go awry, then you're no longer flying. And drones are totally different from that. They all have their independent motors driving their associated propellers. There's no mechanical failure point from one motor to the next. And with the redundancy that we can get on multiple motors, we can actually have failures in any one of those electric motors and still land safely. Like I said, I think that a helicopter is more of a technological challenge than these multi-rotor aircraft that are being developed now.
Yeah, I guess it's along those lines that if you make anything dangerous enough, it will eventually fly. You're right, and a lot of the concepts that we've seen here include everything from 4 rotors to 8 rotors, and all the way up. I think I saw like a 16 rotor model. It's the way that you can design these things, I guess, really function better than what we've known before. And I definitely do like your idea of things like I guess replacing things like a trauma hawk or the helicopters for people, and replacing that with drones, of course, and these unmanned air vehicles. There's a lot to be said for just every application. And I got to say, Utah, I've unfortunately never had the pleasure of going there, but you have a lot of great views. I can definitely see that, yes, having highways over highways makes a lot of sense, but I'm sure that guided tours and things that just weren't industries before will become industries now that you really democratize the sky. So there's
dead on. Absolutely, you're right.
There's definitely a lot to like here. Unfortunately, we're just running quickly out of time. I'm going to let both of you kind of have the final word if we didn't cover anything or if we glossed over something. We'll start with Dr. Larson. Anything that we really want to highlight?
I just want to stress that the development of these amazing new technologies are very focused on safety. So you really need not worry about safety. Safety is going to be built in, all the redundancy. We were able as an aviation industry to get to 0 accidents and through our safety culture, and that same culture is being applied to these vehicles now. So the issue of safety really is not one that people should be concerned about. You're much safer in an unmanned aerial vehicle, urban air mobility, than you are driving your car yourself to the airport. John?
Yeah, well, and Ben, I just had to throw in one last comment about relative to the helicopters. You mentioned the word replace, and I think it's important to know that aircraft are very mission specific and mission oriented. So an aircraft built to do a certain job may not be well suited for a different job. So I don't think that we're ever talking about replacing helicopters or replacing airplanes. I think they have their own place, and I think that this is an entirely new category of aircraft that fits an entirely different mission. And that's the novel part of what we're doing, and that's what's new. Another point with respect to regulation. Yes, there are regulations that hold us back, but what Dr. Larson is doing is breaking down these barriers to regulation and providing a path to make urban air mobility possible. And on top of that, the FAA also has certification standards that are in place for the manned aircraft that are already out there. And if we abide by those certification standards, I think that you're also going to see the FAA certified drones in the near future. The fact that we don't have FAA certified manned drones at this point is not an indication of the future, and in terms of FAA certification. And I think that there's going to be a lot of interesting things going on there. And there's also enough public outcry that I think that the FAA is going to have to respond. They have to acknowledge that this category of aircraft is not going away, and that it has to be accounted for within the regulations. And ElectraFly is like a perfect first step toward opening into this environment with existing technology.
And I have to say that so often on the show here, we talk about, I think when we first mentioned self-driving cars, and Google had the first one, and they were driving it around, and they didn't really tell anyone for about a year and a half, 2 years, until they had, I think it was something like 500,000 miles under their belt already, and they really weren't saying anything. It's so nice to hear regulators are working with companies and these entities to try to get ahead of it, because so much of technology is reactionary when it comes to artificial intelligence, when it comes to self-driving cars, drones. So much of it is we'll put it out there, we'll ask for forgiveness, and then we'll try to legislate it from behind. And to see what, and Dr. Larson, with what you're doing and ElectraFly and how closely you guys are working together, that can only mean faster adoption. I really, really hope that. So both of you, I want to say thank you for coming on the show. Very interesting conversation. I knew it would be, and you guys did not disappoint. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right. And again, one more time, we're going to throw links to, of course, ElectraFly. We're going to throw links to Deseret UAS, everything in the show notes. And in the meantime, both of you, always a welcome invitation here on the show. But thank you for coming on. And I hope you had a great CES. I hope you had a great interview. And looking forward to see what you guys do in the near future.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great one. So long. Thank you so much. All right, everyone, and there they go. So, everyone, great interview. Thank you so much for joining us. And now we're going to go ahead and head on into computer and technology news. So, here we go. So, for today's computer and technology news, we are going to go ahead and start with this story that I don't think anyone actually asked for, but here we are. This is a story from Engadget, Mr. A.J. Dellinger. And MGM, you've heard the movie studio, is somehow making a live action movie about the Viewmaster. Yes, that Viewmaster, the one that you remember from when you were a kid. Well, and of course made by Mattel, is hoping to cash in on your nostalgia. And we've seen this work before with a number of different titles. Some of them work pretty well. A whole movie about toys, Toy Story, worked very, very well. Whereas others, like say something as shallow as an emoji, hence the Emoji Movie, didn't work out too well. So here we are. The toy maker is teaming up with the media company MGM to produce a live action film based on the classic stereoscope toy. Details on the film are sparse, and I bet you the plot of the film is sparse, but there doesn't appear to be writers, directors, actors, anything attached to the film at this time. But it sure seems like the studios are running out of ideas if they're reaching for the Viewmaster as their source material. Mattel's Viewmaster is a toy that has hit just about every generation of kid for the better part of a century. Of course, it was first introduced in 1939, undergone a number of transformations and modernization effects over the last few years. Most recently, Mattel reimagined the classic kids toy as a virtual reality headset, which that part, makes a lot of sense. The movie, not so much. Now, of course, this also comes on the heels that Mattel will also be working on live action film adaptations of, check this out, Hot Wheels and Barbie. Yeah, and I thought that was Need for Speed and Legally Blonde. But I digress. Both produced in partnership with Warner Brothers, American Girl, and which is also owned by Mattel. Other toy companies are looking to get into the mix. Netflix has announced a series with Hasbro's Transformers, of course. Transformers has a long cinematic and television, kind of run. But Hot Wheels, Barbie, and yes, indeed, the Viewmaster. We'll see what comes of it. But again, it's kind of one of those things that I don't think anyone was asking for. But yet, here we are. So there's the first story. I think our next one that we're going to do, trust me, a lot of good ones. The next one we're going to do is actually about Disney. And this is an interesting story because for a couple of years now, we've been talking about the fact that Disney, one of the greatest companies in terms of IP, like, when you talk about all of the comic book movies, superhero movies, when you talk about all of the TV shows, when you talk about all the kids content that they have, Disney is rivaled to none when it comes to actually having content. And especially with their acquisition of things like Fox and their entertainment channels and IPs, Disney is just so far ahead of the competition. But one thing that they haven't had with the competition is a dedicated streaming platform. Think like HBO Go, or of course Netflix, or one of these other many other streaming services that these other companies are putting out. Disney does not have their own. They always had a 30% stake in. They had a 30% stake in Hulu, and of course Disney was looking to expand that, saying that they're looking to take over Warner Media's 10% stake in Hulu off of AT&T's hands. And you may recall, of course, Disney buying Fox, Disney having the 30% stake, and now Disney looking to purchase AT&T's 10% in Hulu means that if everything goes according to plan, Disney will own 70% of Hulu. That's right. With the only holdout being NBC Universal, they will have another 30% themselves, but 70% of a company means that Disney will be able to pull or call the shots. And while NBC Universal will still have a major voice in what kind of content gets on there and, at what rate and things like that, that doesn't really bode well for anyone else that's not Disney. Looks like Disney, as opposed, and this is really the interesting part, where we've talked about Disney coming out with their own streaming service and what that would look like and what that could do to the streaming market. But what happens? What happens if Disney decides to up and buy Hulu in its entirety? And they decide that Hulu, instead of trying to reestablish a Disney Stream or Disney whatever it may, Disney Go, instead of trying to position yet another streaming application, which we already have a pretty crowded market, what if they decide that, hey, Hulu is now the home of Disney, and Hulu becomes the just something that's even more competitive in an already crowded market? And I got to be honest, it's an interesting move. I think that Disney could have, with everything that they have and all the name brand recognition that Disney brings to the table, I felt like Disney could have come at this and said, hey, we have a new streaming service. You're going to want to, be a part of this, buy into our platform. I think Disney really could have done that. They really could have cracked that nut, and it would have been very simple for them. But and by the way, the streaming platform is Disney Plus, but they said that a lot of their other content will be sticking with Hulu. Hulu has the name brand. Hulu is second only after Netflix when it comes to talking about, hey, what streaming services are out there. If Disney can kind of turn Hulu around, because it's still looked down upon because of its ad supported tier plans, and the fact that just traditional television has such a grasp on it. But if Disney can wrestle Hulu away from everyone else, load it full of Disney content, and then add some more content on top of that is exclusive to streaming, hey, Hulu could suddenly become a very, very powerful force. As opposed to losing ground, it could then be gaining ground. Something to, of course, watch for. So there's that article, Disney making interesting moves. And by the way, one other point, they mentioned that Variety didn't say how much Disney offered AT&T, but they did say AT&T's original $583 million investment in 2016 now has an implied value of about $930 million. So, of course, if AT&T is looking to sell, Disney would pay a premium somewhere just north of $1 billion, would be a safe estimate for what you're looking at. So Disney could be even more into Hulu. Interesting move. So, as I said before, there's that story. And now, we have time for a couple more. Let's talk about the Dow Jones. And not about the stock market, although very interesting. trust me, it's cool to see the numbers go up and down, green and red, little arrows pointing all over the place. It's great. But this is a security breach. Zach Whitaker over at TechCrunch, Dow Jones watch list of 2.4 million high-risk individuals has been leaked. That's right. A watch list of risky individuals and corporate entities owned by Dow Jones has been exposed after a company with access to the database left it on a server without a password. Folks, we've said it all the time. This is how it happens. It's not some super criminal ring with master hackers and that kind of thing. No, it's people are very vigilant and they look and they poke and they pry and they find someone who has messed up. And this is a pretty big mess up. So they said that an independent security researcher found the Amazon Web Services hosted Elasticsearch database exposing more than 2.4 million records of individuals or business entities. There you go. The data, since secured, is the financial giant's watchlist database, which companies use as part of their risk and compliance efforts. Other financial companies like Thomson Reuters have their own database of high-risk clients, politically exposed persons, and terrorists, but have also been exposed over the years through separate security lapses. So obviously these lists, they're very highly guarded. Think of them as, in so many industries, kind of like the secret formula to what makes them successful. And if they happen to lose these lists, it's not that Dow Jones is worried about embarrassing anyone over these high risk these 2.4 million high risk individuals. No, it's that this is what makes them money. The data and the list that they've put together and the profiles that they've made, they let the Dow Jones kind of analyze the market in a way that no one else can because they don't have access to the data up until this point. They said that a 2010 data brochure billed the Dow Jones watch list as allowing customers to easily and accurately identify high-risk clients with detailed up-to-date profiles on any individual or company in the database. And at the time, the database had 650,000 entries, the brochure said. So that list includes, of course, current and former politicians, individuals, or companies under sanctions of high-profile financial crimes such as fraud, anyone with links to terrorism. Essentially, a watch list where you don't want to be on, but more so, you really, especially if you want to make financial decisions, as Dow Jones would, very much like you to do. They want to make sure that you don't invest in anyone who could be seen as high risk. This was a very sensitive and valuable document. So here we go. The one name found at random was Badruddin Haqqani, a commander of the Haqqani guerrilla insurgent network in the Afghanistan affiliated with the Taliban. In 2012, the U.S. Treasury imposed sanctions on Haqqani and others for involvement in financial terrorism. He was killed in a U.S. drone attack in Pakistan months later. The database record, categorized him under sanctions list and terror. And they even have an example of what one of these 2.4 million people look like. This is what one of the entries would look like. And it would be the person, the notes, what they are accused of, things like that. So obviously, they said that the data set is part of a risk and compliance feed product, which is entirely derived from publicly available sources. And trust me, working in media, I see this all the time. What these documents hold isn't exactly sensitive data, like I mentioned. It's just that it's well organized, well put together data that can then be referenced by any number of people. Sometimes it's not about having sensitive data, it's more about having relevant data. And that's what they were pushing. That's what was leaked. And yeah, here we go. So And again, not the first time for this institution or other institutions, but just something to, kind of take note of. It's very interesting to see the inner workings of the financial industry and sometimes what happens when things go awry. So I think in these last couple of minutes, we're going to go over this next article. And this is for anyone out there who's maybe thinking about looking for a job or, changing jobs or things like that. Obviously, Computer America, we highly encourage you to look into the tech sector, either the cybersecurity or programming or things like that. Well, this article could give you some ideas, and this is according to a company called Hired. Jonathan Schieber. Here are the most in-demand programming jobs in languages, and this is again according to Hired. So in a survey of about 98,000 developers on the company's platform, they said that Hired assessed the kinds of jobs that are most in demand and the languages that companies are interested in hiring for, and the top average salaries for careers in several major tech markets. These include New York, Paris, San Francisco, London, the biggies. So, and as the article says, the results may surprise you. You can see them here. The first one, the first in demand, and this is for the San Francisco Bay Area. You can see them, you can see them across the globe, but here we go. The San Francisco Bay Area search engineer. There you go. Second one, security engineer, blockchain engineer, natural language processing engineer, and machine learning engineer. Folks, all of those. And for San Francisco, it's a pretty decent wage. I'm not going to say it's blow your mind, but for San Francisco, for California, you're looking at about 150,000 plus. And these are the top salaries, I believe. Not starting, top. But yeah, they said that companies are requesting programmers with blockchain experience, shot up over 517%. I expect that to go down, honestly, a little bit. The blockchain craze really hit in the 2017, 2018, of course, with Bitcoin surging in price. Companies were looking to take advantage of that, but blockchain is still important. I just don't think every company is looking to utilize it like they were last year. So I'd probably take blockchain engineer and knock that down a couple pegs, but machine learning, of course, natural language processing, of course, security, of course, search makes perfect sense. Every large tech company out there has to have a good search engineer. All this makes perfect sense. And then to cap off the article, they said that, most in-demand coding languages across the globe. And this is something that, hey, if you're thinking about looking for another language to learn, or, you want to, start with something. And honestly, the third one on this list is one I've heard is really, really good to start with. And it's called Ruby. Ruby or Ruby on Rails, very, very simple, very easy to get into, and a great place to start. But the number one on the list is a programming language called Go. Go programming language is used for open source programming language, makes it simple, reliable, and efficient software. It's for who knows? Dragonfly, BSD, FreeBSD, Linux, Mac OS. Yeah, there you go. So it's similar to C, but yeah. So Go is the number one out there, followed by Scala, Ruby, TypeScript, and Kotlin. Kotlin. Yeah, so this article was pretty interesting. Just wanted to, of course, throw it out there. And hey, if you are interested in, maybe expanding your horizons or checking out something different, then that could be it. But ladies and gentlemen, we had a lot of different stories. If you want to find out more, you can, of course, check out some of these other stories, including new 2D ion crystals that could be used for large-scale quantum computers. Apple details how they're shaking up their self-driving car division. That's right, Apples and cars. and more. But everyone, the music means that we're just about done. I want to say thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for Deseret UAS for, of course, joining us on the program here today. Very interesting interview. And ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoyed any part of that or if you missed any part of that, check out the podcast. It's today's show in its entirety rebroadcast. Ladies and gentlemen, until next time, thank you so much for tuning into Computer America here. And catch us tomorrow. Ralph Bond should be on the program. It's always a fun time with Ralph Bond. And until next time, everyone, have a great day. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend. I catch you here tomorrow. And then have a great weekend. But until next time, everyone, bye-bye.